Okay. So welcome to the 11th annual Campagna-Kerven Lecture on Modern Turkey. We know it's spring because Suzanne Campagna, like the robins, has returned to Boston. Suzanne, raise your hand, Suzanne. Suzanne is right there. Suzanne's visit is very special to us. It's a very special reason to welcome spring. We have her to thank for initiating and supporting this marvelous lecture series on modern Turkey for the last 11 years. The lecture honors the memory of her father, Mehmet Nahid Kerven, a young Turk, and of her husband, Gerard Campagna, who wrote his PhD on foreign policy of Turkey under a famous Boston University professor, Warren Alt, who's no longer with us. Suzanne's father was a military officer arrested by the Ottoman government for his political beliefs. He fled to Paris, then returned in 1911 along with his French wife Marguerite to take part in creating the Turkish Republic. He was elected to the Turkish parliament and served for 12 years before being appointed to the board of İş Bankası, Turkey's first national bank. Suzanne grew up in Istanbul but was sent to Paris for her education, where she studied pharmacy. It was there during World War II that she met Gerard Campagna, who was in the U.S. Army. They married and moved to the United States, living for a while in Boston on Beacon Hill, while Gerard Campagna pursued his PhD at Boston University, and then in Washington, D.C., where he was a CIA analyst. Suzanne continues to follow local and international affairs, and I have to say it's not uncommon to run into her at meetings in Washington. She's become a wonderful friend, not only to me and Richard Norton, the lecture series organizer who is abroad at the moment, but also to the BU community. I don't exaggerate when I say that there are many people who look forward every spring to seeing her in Boston and to hearing that year's Campagna-Kerven speaker. The Campagna-Kerven Lecture Series provides a forum for leading experts, journalists, scholars, business leaders, literary talents, and other creative artists on modern Turkey, as well as by promising younger scholars and intellectuals. Given the increasing importance of Turkey on the global scene and its major role in the Middle East, the Campagna-Kerven lectures are dedicated to fostering informed public debate on questions of the day, as well as improving the public's knowledge of Turkish society and politics. This year, the event also is part of the 6th annual Boston Turkish Film and Culture Festival, and I'd like to thank Erkut Gömülü for his support. I'm very pleased to introduce this year's Campagna-Kerven speaker, Salih Memecan, one of Turkey's foremost cartoonists. Dr. Memecan received his PhD in architecture from the University of Pennsylvania, where he was a Fulbright scholar, and he has an MA in architecture from Middle East Technical University. His daily agenda includes a political cartoon strip, Bizim City, on the front page of the daily Sabah newspaper, and a comics cartoon strip, Sizinkiler, on the back page. And I have a book of some of the Sizinkiler comics here. They're out on the table if you want to leaf through them. This one is in English and it says, "Love is a doorknob." The animated version of Bizim City is aired daily on the primetime news program on ATV. Dr. Memecan also submits weekly cartoons to the Sabah newspaper on global issues. He created Sizinkiler 15 years ago, and today it's become the most popular cartoon strip in Turkey, with over 1.5 million books sold. So here's another one of his books. This one is called "Oh No, It's Him Again." His cartoons also have appeared in major U.S. newspapers, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Baltimore Sun, and the Philadelphia Inquirer. And he will guide us today through current political events in Turkey through cartoons and animation. I'd like to welcome Salih Memecan.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me here. It's an honor to be part of this, such a distinguished lecture series. So today I will be showing you some cartoons about Turkish politics, and I'll be talking about, the cartoons will make great excuses to talk about Turkish politics. Most of these cartoons appeared on Sabah newspaper as well as Aktüel news magazine. Okay. Now, last night was an interesting night for Turks because we had, it was decided on who would be the next president of Turkey. And it will be Abdullah Gül, current foreign minister. It was basically, it would be voted by the parliament. So parliament is controlled by AK Party, and so basically he was decided by the leader of AK Party. But it was a stressful process. So I had to draw a cartoon this morning about this. So I did it. And I didn't have a sleep because people kept calling me, so what do you think of it? So this is the case. And so now Abdullah Gül, I like the guy. He's a nice guy. I think he's a successful politician. And he's the leader of the reform, so many reforms done recently. And this, let me show you, this cartoon. So Gül means smile. So as well as it means rose. So change in state, before Gül, which says don't smile, and then it says smile or Gül. You see, state in Turkey represent the the state ideology. On the other hand, we have people who was mostly represented by the political parties and the parliament, but the presidency here is to represent the state ideology, the ideology of the founding fathers. Sometimes the ideologies of both sides don't match, but state is very serious. They don't like to, be so friendly because they represent higher values of the state. But this time, Gül being the politician himself, like Özal, couple presidents ago, from 1980s, he's more friendly towards people or towards people's ideas or people's choices. But this process of deciding who will be the next president was a long process, and it was a stressful one, because basically he would be decided by the prime minister of Turkey. And he just kept it in a way that he didn't say it, who would be the next president. So I drew this cartoon about the prime minister. If he were the Oscar announcer, he would go, and the Oscar goes to, he kept, going. And for a while, people thought that he would be the president himself. Now, that's a problematic for some people, at least, because he is known to be an Islamist or traditionalist, and they believe that he doesn't represent enough the ideas of the Republican values. So there was a big protest several weeks ago, or 14th of April. So people carried signs saying that we don't want him as president. Okay, there are two secularists walking. They don't want him as president, but that also means they want him as prime minister. So if you really don't want him, then you shouldn't want him as prime minister. So it's the same thing in a way. So now one of the reasons is headscarf issue, because they have wives who wear headscarves, and they think that that's against the state ideology, so they shouldn't be taking place in public domain. So president's palace somehow is considered a public domain, whereas prime minister's residence is not. So there are schools, for instance, or other places that women with headscarf cannot go. So this cartoon is about that issue. Some places are off limits. So official instructions for headscarves, wrong way to wear it and right way to wear it. So this is really a big tension in Turkey. You know, whether we should let those women wearing headscarf into official buildings or not, or whether they represent the Islamist movement, which is a political movement, or because they wear it because that's the way they wear it. So now secularist people are very uptight about this issue. You know, they want to be sure that Turkey stays secular and don't be a country like Iran. So this secularist guy, you know, praying God to keep the regime as secular as it is. Actually, I think this is my opinion that this is over-exaggerated so that they keep, or some people keep, control of the regime by creating this scare. And Bush does the same thing. You know, there is this terrorism out there, so we should go and get them. You know, same with the Turkish state or Turkish elitists. And we have strong military, and we have this strong military which involved sometimes with the democracy, and in every 10 years or so we have military interventions, but seems like we are passing that stage in our democracy. So far everything is under control, and I don't hope that we will have another coup or another military intervention. Now, we had a recent one 10 years ago, which was on February of 28. In National Security Council, generals gave a letter to the prime minister, who was from an Islamist party. They said that he should leave the position. In fact, he did somehow. So this is the 10th year anniversary, but still the power is controlled by the so-called Islamist people. It didn't make a big difference. So we have this national ideology is represented by Atatürk. But Atatürk's ideology depends on who wants to interpret it. Some people say he's pointing that way, some people say he's pointing the other way. It changes. But it's always safe to say that Atatürk wants it that way. So this government, in order to come over this problem, they decided that it's better to become part of European Union, so we'll be over this state ideology or Turkey being a local country rather than we should be part of Europe. But the problem with it, Europeans don't want it as much as we want them. Actually, they want it, but they don't want to show it right now. There are some obstacles in front of Turkey and Europe for Turkey to become part of the European Union. One is Cyprus issue. Somehow Europeans see Cyprus as a very important power in Europe, whereas Turkey is not. Turkey has 70 million people living in Turkey, and when they become a member of European Union, it will be a very powerful voice. You know, when they vote, it would make a difference. But still, Cyprus, so they say Cyprus don't want you. We say, okay. So another issue, there are some other issues come. Adultery issue was on the table for a while because this government, being a conservative government, wanted adultery to become a crime. So they tried to pass a law, but then Europeans said that this is a personal business, you cannot pass that. So they didn't. But for a while, it was a big issue in Turkey. Another issue is human rights. That's been a big issue. Now we have much improvements on that, but still we are lacking something, so we should still have, we still need some improvements, but we are getting better. We used to have a short leash on that. Now we have a longer one, but as I said, it still needs to get better. Now, recently the government passed a law which is called Article 301. Now, this Article 301 makes it illegal to insult Turkishness, whatever that is. So you cannot insult Turks or Turkishness or things related to Turks. Actually, they say that there are laws against, laws similar to this in Western countries, but the laws similar to this one are there to protect the minorities rather than majorities in the country. Here you cannot insult a minority group so that, a hatred begins. But in Turkey, it protects Turkishness. You see, it should be against constitution, because Turkish constitutions doesn't, in order to be a Turk or Turkish citizen, you don't have to be ethnically Turk. You can be Jewish, you can be, Armenian, you can be Greek, but still you can be full-fledged Turkish citizen. So if you make it illegal to insult Turkishness, how about Armenianness, Jewishness, or, whatever? But government said, okay, we got that, and Europeans want that to change, so we'll change it. But then they are afraid of opposition blaming that, they are making it free to insult Turkishness. So they really don't know what to do. They have good intentions to change it, but they don't know how to do it. Now it's still a big issue in Turkey. Now last year, a Turkish author Orhan Pamuk was tried to be sent to court for being against this article, but then it was rejected. He said that Turks killed some Armenians, some Kurds, so it's been taken as insult to Turkishness, so people reacted to him. But then he got Nobel Prize, and which made Turks feel very good. Here Europeans saying no to everything Turks want, and then finally we get Nobel. Also, some Turkish businessmen can make. That was good for Turkey, because you could promote Turkey or Turkishness with this Nobel Prize and Orhan Pamuk. Here is a joke about textile businessman in textile, making shirt with 100% Orhan Pamuk. Pamuk means literally cotton in Turkish, so it's 100% Orhan cotton. Now, big problem nowadays in Turkey is nationalism. The reason for that is Europe rejects Turkey, and Turks get angry towards Europe, saying that they don't understand us, they are prejudiced against us, so why don't we have prejudice against Europeans? So that doesn't just stop with Europeans, but they react against minorities, against other religions, and so on. So Turkish nationalists take a flag, lots of time, go outside and make protests. So this cartoon is about that. And they beat people. Now they recently got angry with French people, because French recently passed a law making it illegal to deny Armenian genocide. Now we got very angry with this. So we became against anything French, including French kiss. So this is a cartoon about the same issue, practicing freedom of speech in France. Excuse me, I would like to insult Prophet Muhammad. Of course, go ahead. There was no Armenian genocide, he screams. So this is a double standard on France's side. You know, it's... And several months ago, a Armenian author in Turkey, Turkish Armenian author or writer was killed by a crazy guy. And the Turks got very upset about it. And thousands, 100,000, 200,000 Turkish people walked in protest in memory of Hrant Dink. And they all carried signs saying that we are all Armenian, we are all Hrant Dink. And they caught the murderer, the killer, but they don't know who they are. There's just a lone guy out there. He killed him, but we don't know why he killed him, who's behind it. They are still trying it, but this cartoon is about that. Okay, we are all Armenian, but who's this guy? So it's about the same thing. You know, there's behind another person, and behind that another person, and keeps going, but you never reach the end of it. It's provocation. So they try to make Turkey, or they try to create instability in Turkey, especially before this presidential election, so that you know, things won't work out as they are planned. Of course, the judiciary system doesn't help on that, because the judiciary system is easily manipulated. So, you know, you try to reach the end point, and then all of a sudden it stops someplace within the system. Universities, another institution in Turkey, state institution, which needs to be liberated, I guess. It's not really the place where you can practice freedom of speech. So this is a professor. He is tied to the statue which represent the official ideology. I mean, you cannot say things that are off limit or offline with official ideology. Okay, another obstacle against Turkey for getting into before getting into European Union, is military's intervention with the politics. They care about, you know, political business more than in other European country. So here in the cartoon, Prime Minister says maybe we should have chosen a different vehicle just for the sake of our image. You know, we look very militaristic. About economy. So we have to improve our economy in order to part of European Union. It's getting there, but we have a long way to go. So here is, I drew this cartoon when we had an economic crisis. So the guy asks, are you all right? It's no need to ask, actually, it's economy, you know. The answer is obvious. One of the reasons why economy doesn't work as well, because of the corruption. So here they had a committee meeting to fight against corruption, and the guy says, where did my pen go? Of course, we have diseases. All of a sudden, we have, you know, tourism flourishing, and then we have bird flu. Then we have mad cow disease, and the economy goes back again. Here, a mad cow, and says, I have a mad cow disease. She has a bird flu. What's your problem? And the guy says, I am hungry or nothing to eat. Disaster after another. So, tourism, we have Turkish economy based on tourism in big part. So here is the guy. I thought there were no tourists this year. Who just jumped into the water then? A guy in tourism business. Because when there is a fight going on or war going on next door, not as many tourists come to Turkey. So it's very, you know, We don't want war, we don't want terrorism in our country, we don't want problems. So we expect more tourists to come so that, you know, our economy gets better. And of course, Chinese are there. Our textile and industry, which was very good for a while, for the time, but then with Chinese coming into field, it's also not as good anymore. Unemployment is a problem. Here, it's decreasing though. One of the ways, I mean, so many guys working on just one job, so that unemployment will decrease. Okay, in Turkish offices, we have people serving tea. So there's this guy out there. Did I do something? No.
Perhaps we could take some questions
Sure.
in the meantime while they're looking for the new bulb. Are we on film? Is this?
I can, yes.
Okay. So before he turns the camera on, this is being filmed because the Campagna-Kerven lectures are always available online on the Campagna-Kerven website on the web. So if you want to watch it again, you can. And so we have our able assistants here who have microphones which will allow your questions to be more easily inserted into the web film continuum. So if you wouldn't mind just raising your hand and then we'll bring the microphone to you.
I have a very simple question, but is your newspaper written in English?
No, it's in Turkish. So these cartoons are all translated. They are funnier in Turkish.
What I was wondering most of the time when I was reading your scripts as well is, how is it like to be a political cartoonist in Turkey? I mean, what's the best part of it, or what's the worst part of it?
Okay, best part of it, people know you and come to you and say that I loved your cartoon today, or I watched your cartoon tonight on TV and it's so nice and so on. You know, as an artist, you feel good about it. Worst part is if you're a political cartoonist, you are always into politics. I mean, you don't like it. I mean, you want to stay away, but you cannot. You have to do your homework by reading all those columns and columnists, and you have to read all the news. You cannot never stay away. Even when you are vacationing, you have to read it so that when you get back, you are not far behind. For that reason, I mean, 10 years ago, the political situation wasn't as pleasant in Turkey, so we decided to move away, at least for a year, stay away from this cartooning and Turkish politics. They said, okay, move away, but do your work from wherever you are, so that you won't be within the newspaper, you won't be within in this turmoil. So I said, okay, so we moved to New York with my family. So I started sending my cartoons through email to my newspaper. You know, it helped. I wasn't in the middle of the editorial meeting, fighting with people, getting involved with the politics, but, you know, there's a country out there with things going on. So I read the news about that country, so I drew a cartoon and emailed it. So that helped. But it worked for a year. I said, since it worked for a year, I'll keep doing it forever. So since then, I've been working from New York or from anywhere with my laptop and email.
Yes, there's a question.
You studied architecture. What caused you to switch over to cartooning?
Okay. when I started architectural school, I started my professional life as a cartoonist on the side. You know, my first cartoon appeared on the newspaper when I was a first-year student in the architectural school. But I never trusted cartooning as a profession. So I kept going in architecture until I finished my PhD. So at that moment, I have to make a decision whether this will be architecture will be my profession or the cartooning will be my profession. So I decided on cartooning. But I really didn't trust cartooning because I even remember I went to this exhibition by a famous Turkish cartoonist, and I asked him, I also draw cartoons, but I study architecture on the side because I don't think I could make money from from cartooning. So he said, I do it, I can do it, so why can't you? That was encouraging. Yes?
The few cartoons that we have seen don't show that much about the split between the Islamists and the secularists. Is that how big an issue?
It's a big issue. It's a big issue, but both sides need to understand one another, actually. I think it's an artificial division. Now, we don't have leftists and rightists, but we have... it's not really correct to call it secularist and Islamist. It is really, at one side, there are people who say that people's choice or people values are most important, and they should be the deciding value is who's deciding who's running the government. On the other side, we have these people who say that, okay, we have this republic, we have this republican values which was established by the founder of this country in 1920s, 30s, so we should not get away from those principles. So there's actually a fight between those two ideas, those two groups of people. One group say we have our tradition, we have our religion, we have our values, so we should be able to practice it. And the other people say that, well, we have our republican values, and they are the ones which will carry us to modern world or whatever. So we should stick to that. But the way they describe modern is the way they describe modern architecture. It was modern at that time, but it needs to be changed or improved upon.
Thank you very much. I have actually two questions. One has to do with the reactions you may or may not receive from people who may not like your political slant, your political perspective in the country. And the second question is following on the same line of thinking, has to do with your, you mentioned something in your presentations that as a country, as a society, you don't want to become like Iran. Now, in your presentations of images, do you use images from other countries to convey a point? For example, like the religious fundamentalism in Iran vis-a-vis, your prime minister or other people. So, how does the international angle, other than EU, get involved in your representation?
I will show some cartoons about international things. So we use symbols from other countries. Recently, I attended a meeting in Davos, part of World Economic Forum meetings. I was asked to make a cartoon presentation for a discussion on Iran. I said, I cannot. I don't know much about Iran, and it's very difficult to draw cartoons about Iran issues. So instead, they assigned me sex on the brain issue, which was more fun, which is the difference between the way women think and the man think. But this Swiss cartoonist, he volunteered for the Iran cartoons, Iran panel. So that was his big mistake, he said, because he used the symbols of religious leaders as Iranian leaders. And Iranian people said, or the politicians said, we have to see the cartoons beforehand. The cartoonist said, no, you cannot. This is my presentation. But they say, this is our issue, our country will be discussed there. So they finally found another guy, a third person, so who checked the cartoons, told them, and they said, finally they showed the cartoons. But still, Iranians got angry because they felt that it was insult to their religious leaders the way it's been shown there. You know, it's a cultural thing. And do I get criticized by my friends or other people because of my cartoons? Yes. But they don't have to see my cartoons. I usually talk to them and they get upset and I get criticized anyway. They know how I feel about the political issues. You know, by doing such a job, you are a political person, although I don't like politics and I want to stay away as much as possible. But you get to meet politicians, you get to meet other political writers and so on. So it becomes a big issue in your life, and it's disturbing. It may get so I like my other job, cartooning for children. Much fun and much better than this one. I enjoy it.
Sorry for getting back into politics, but recently there were 12 new countries that joined the EU, and those countries are all new, you could say new democracies, and they were developing countries, unlike the old members of the EU. So do you think that Turkey will have a better chance to be accepted with those countries that are much similar, you could say, to Turkey politically, maybe economically? And do you think that the Turks will wait for that to happen? Just personal prediction.
Okay. I think we will wait for that to happen. Turkey has the 16th largest economy in the world. And again, we have 70 million people in Turkey. And you see, some of those 10 countries have populations much less than Turkey. So it's easy to absorb those countries into European Union. It doesn't change much in Europe. They will adopt themselves, and Europe will adapt itself to this union. But in Turkey's case, it's a big thing. When Turkey gets in there, all of a sudden, Europe, more like a homogeneous culture, a Christian culture, European culture historically, will get involved with a different culture, you know, although they're already involved somehow. But, you know, again, 70 million is a big population. And also when it comes to voting, Turkey will have a lot to say on, making on decisions. That's disturbing, not on the politicians or the leaders of the countries, because they see that this unity will be better or will be good for Europe economically and security-wise as well. But it takes time for people, European people, to understand that or get used to this idea. All of a sudden, those strange, Muslim people come in. They think they would, Turks would go and work in Europe and get their jobs, but I believe it will work other way around, because in order for Turkey to become part of European Union, we have to improve our economy. Once we improve our economy, Turks won't go to Europe. In fact, the ones who are there would come back. And for Turkey, the most important thing is not to become a member of European Union. I think it's the process of it. If we stop the process, then we won't have this excuse to improve ourselves or guiding principles to improve ourselves. So we should keep going as if we will be the member of European Union. When the time comes to make the real decision, then we can decide, see if it's good for us or if it's not good for us. But the whole idea is we should keep going as if we will be a member of European. In fact, nowadays the process on certain negotiations, certain chapters stopped for Cyprus issue. But Turkey decided that we will keep going or get prepared if it's as if it's going on, because we think the process is important.
This has nothing to do with cartoons, but I would like to have your opinion. Since Turkey is a secular country within a Muslim culture, what do you think happened in Turkey for the secular elements not to prevail as compared to the Muslim elements? Since you had such a strong leader as Atatürk, what happened in Turkey?
Could you repeat the question again?
Yeah, you have two components of your culture, the secular and the Muslim, but apparently the Muslim, at least in the last few years, seem to be prevailing over the secular culture. What do you think happened in Turkey to justify this?
All right, Muslims do not prevail as Muslims. They prevail as, Turks. They don't do anything Islamic about running the country. In fact, they are doing reforms to make Turkey a part of the European Union, so that way, there won't be any issue of secularism in Turkey. It will be guaranteed by the European rules and regulations. So they are not really trying to make Turkey an Islamic country or anything like that. They are, in fact, it's wrong to call them Islamists or religious people. They may be practicing religion more than the other people, but that doesn't mean much. There is no question of changing the regime or changing the principles of Turkish Republic. So I don't see any.
Yeah, but you have, for instance, this ban in certain areas of Ankara, I believe. This ban on alcoholic drinks in certain parts of Ankara.
No, there's no such thing. I mean, in New York, there are more rules and regulations on drinking, but in Turkey, some neighborhoods don't want bars to be open on residential areas. That's it. But in Turkey, you can have.
It's not for religious reasons, then.
No, it's not. Recently, a secularist guy, ultra-secularist guy, protested the government by drinking alcohol in a park, which would be illegal in New York, for instance. I mean, you shouldn't be drinking outside. But he drank. Although it's illegal in Turkey too. You can have drinks in restaurants. You can have drinks in outside cafes. But you shouldn't be drinking thing. But public pressure is another thing, something else. Okay, when it's Ramadan and if you drink outside in a park or then you get nasty looks. But that's not in the rules or regulations or in the laws.
I just have another question. Did you feel threatened during the times of the Danish cartoon fiasco? Or could you talk about that for a minute?
No, I felt important. In fact, I was invited to Denmark by an organization in New York, young Muslim leaders there was a meeting, young Muslim leaders of tomorrow, actually Muslim leaders of tomorrow. They are supposed to be young. I was there not as a young Muslim person, but as a cartoonist, because they were going to discuss the cartoon issue. So they invited the editor. So we had a discussion, and I drew some cartoons related to the topic. So he published, he printed them in the same newspaper, in the same pages. So we in a way understood one another. The problem there is, I think, is because of the globalization. Now we Muslim people get to see what not non-Muslims or Christians think about us, and we get angry, and they see that we get angry or we react. So, and both sides don't get too happy about those things. But we'll get used to it. I mean, Muslim people will be more tolerant, will be more understanding, and Westerners, Christians, will have more respect for other cultures. So when this happens, I'm sure it will happen in time. So we'll have a better life.
I had two questions. I wondered if you'd talk a bit about your newspaper, the primary source for your cartoons in Turkey. What is its perspective, history, connections, and so on? And the other thing I was curious, if I'm not mistaken, a couple of years ago when the Erdogan government assumed power and several women who were veiled wanted to take seats in parliament, they were refused. Now, as I understand it, the newly elected president's wife veils. So what's going to happen when the president shows up in official venues, like the parliament perhaps, which would seem kind of normal, with his spouse? Is there going to have to be some new legislation, or will it be assumed she will never show up in public? Or what are people in Turkey thinking about this kind of thing?
Okay, the first question about my newspaper. Sabah is a 22 years old newspaper. It's one of two major newspapers. It's a liberal newspaper. The other one is Hürriyet, which has a population of about 600,000. Sabah has circulation of 600,000. Sabah has a daily circulation of 500,000. And Hürriyet is more state-oriented, represent the values of the state. Sabah is more represent the values of people, more people-oriented. But basically, quite similar newspapers. They have color, pictures of nice ladies, and political news as well. It's a mixture of tabloid newspaper plus the New York Times, New York Post and New York Times put together kind of newspaper. Recently, we are having a problem with my newspaper because my boss used to own a bank. He sold, so he bankrupted. The newspaper was sold to another guy, and now, we are in transition. Business-wise, we are having a problem, but seems like it will be sold again. The second question about the headscarf issue, that was not the Erdogan party. It was 10 years ago. It was Erbakan party. He was also has an Islamic tendencies. He wanted her to. She was elected, but objected by some other members of the parliament with the opposition and so on. So somehow, with the help of the legislation, which was quite state-oriented, they said it's illegal to have this headscarf in parliament. But about state venues or anything, prime minister, foreign minister, president of the parliament, they all have wives who wear headscarves, so they have no problem so far. Except this present president wouldn't let them into their, his own residence. So right now, the person living in the residence will be wearing headscarf, so that won't be any problem anymore. People don't see that as a problem, except this president and some military people saw that as a problem. But when you walk in the street, you see a woman with headscarf walk around with woman without headscarf. But somehow people get scared that once you let them wear headscarf, they will take over.
So, let me interrupt if I may. We have our lights are back on, and so if you wouldn't mind continuing,
Okay.
And then if there are more questions at the end, we can do that again.
Okay, I was talking about Turkish economy. So the improvements that we should do before getting into Europe. Another thing, things are expensive in Turkey. Somehow I usually buy some stuff from America, take it to Turkey, and people say, why are you buying things here and taking it? Because I say certain things are cheaper here. Internet, for instance, it's much cheaper in America, although you cannot take it to Turkey. but we have the most expensive internet service in the world in Turkey. So they hit the guys, I mean, it says hands up, this is a robbery. Now, economy, although I kept criticizing it, is getting much better recently. Not much better, but getting better, and it will get better because we have foreign investment coming. People come to Turkey, buy land, and build high rises. They buy newspapers, and so on. So economy used to be like this. Now it's like this. We are doing much better. So this is about the land sales in Istanbul. These parts will make us rich. There's a piece of land from Istanbul in them. Because when you invest in a land in Istanbul, it's obvious that in 10 years or 5 years' time, you'll be rich. I was sitting in a restaurant at Soho in New York with a Turkish friend of mine, and we were talking in Turkish. A lady sitting at the next table and said to us, asked us if we were from Istanbul, and we said yes. And she said she's going to Istanbul next week to buy a real estate. And we said, why are you buying a real estate in Istanbul, and how are you buying it? She said she found it through internet, and she just chose one, and now she's going to Turkey to close it. So Istanbul is a good investment. Now, cultural difference is another issue between Europeans and Turks. Now we have, as I said, on certain chapters, negotiations stopped. After we restart, I'm sure there will be some change. Now, about the cartoon issue. The way I see it, cartoonists are not the people to blame on this. It's the editor. Although he seemed like a very nice guy when I met him, but he asked for cartoonists to submit cartoons insulting or criticizing or whatever about Muhammad. Well, that's looking for, you don't ask, even in my newspaper, insult this politician, insult that. Editors don't ask such things, Now, should it be illegal to draw cartoons of Muhammad? No, I don't think it should be. I don't think anything should be illegal for cartoonists. They should be free to draw whatever they want. But there is a position called editors. There are people who call themselves editors. Their job is to decide which cartoons are to be publishable, which are not. So in this Denmark case, the editor didn't do his job well because he published the cartoons that would obviously get reaction from people. Now they say that, okay, it's the freedom of expression. Yes, it may be the freedom of expression for West, but for Eastern culture, it's an insult. It creates disturbance there. So this is inconsiderate neighbor, So, but it's, as a cartoonist, I feel somewhat nervous about drawing a cartoon nowadays because here I have this pen in front of me. I draw something and nobody checks it. It's usually, last minute thing and they publish it. Would I create, a war between cultures? So I should be very careful about it. Again, the problem is Western people create this image. It's like the secularists in Turkey. Create this image of Islam, and then they get themselves scared of it. Actually, they are nice people, most of them. Now, Pope said those things about Muhammad, more Muslim people go out and convert people with swords and, kill them, things like that. So Turkish people or Muslim people reacted to that. So this Pope, is somewhat also creating problem. But on the other hand, and later he came to Turkey, which was a very courageous thing to do. Just a couple months after his statements, and he was quite welcomed in Turkey, and he was very nice towards Turks or Muslims in Turkey. In fact, my wife met him when he came there. That doesn't make him nicer, but... And there was a little problem in Istanbul because the traffic, it made a big cross there. Because of the security reasons, they closed so many roads and, highways. But the Pope is influenced by Turkish culture. He now dips the bread in it. Now, in that meeting in Denmark, Muslim leaders of tomorrow complain about being labeled as Muslims. So this cartoon I drew in Denmark, a label for Muslim. But when you look at it, when you had a close-up, it's usually they had different label. So best thing to do is to understand one another. So here, meeting of civilization, this is Turkish Prime Minister, this is a European leader, We should try to speak the same language. Now, last year we had Christmas or New Year met with our holidays. We sacrifice sheep. So both holidays got together. So this is a cartoon about it. So many people had Christmas trees, although we are not Christians, but it's nice to have Christmas trees for New Year. And we also sacrifice sheep. So both cultures got together. So eventually we should work harder for European Union. But Europeans is not one total body. They have different opinions, different nations, different leaders, so they fight among themselves. But we will wait, and eventually we'll join the European Union. British are on our side. They want Turkey to become member as soon as possible. So this is Blair. This will take us to Europe, right? It is the only flight we could get in, He's the most friendly towards towards Turkey. But the problem is, things in Europe is not going as well. So before we get in there, I don't know if Europe will be there when we want to get in there. So recently Europe celebrated its 50th birthday, and they didn't invite Turkey. So we kind of got upset, angry. So I drew this cartoon. When it's his 100th birthday with Turkey, with the young population, I'm sure they will invite us then. So Europe needs Turkey, Turkey needs Europe. So we should be more understanding towards one another and keep the negotiations going. One thing good about this European issue, it makes good excuse to make the reforms. And here in this case, Prime Minister's wife using the same excuse. Can you go get some bread? Not right now, but the EU wants it, because whatever EU wants it, our Prime Minister takes it into his agenda. Now about the situation in our neighbors, Iraq situation. Now George Bush bringing democracy to Middle East, to Iraq. But sometimes things don't fit. You have the right thing for the right place. On the same issue, just America gets into Middle East. There is this old historical background and different associations and hatreds and so on, and just you get in there and you cannot get out. This is nation building. I had a PhD on building technology, so I know that you don't build an arch like that. There's a way of building things. You have to start from both ends and then meet in the center. And this is Middle East politics of United States. So this is Iranian. I was giving this lecture some weeks ago in Los Angeles, and some person said, don't they get offended when you see your neighbors like that? Then I realized, yeah, they may. I draw cartoons for Turkish audience when I show them outside, especially in LA. There were so many Armenians there. But after all, cartoons sometimes may hurt, and that's excusable. This is the Iraq situation again. America is here, and he wants to leave, but it's not that easy. Right now, Middle East is a whole mess. If America leaves, as it is, there will be big chaos, and so many other parties will get involved. Now, Turkey is very nervous about what's happening in northern Iraq. So we have this thing that we don't want our nation, our country, to be divided. Kurds having a separate nation or separate state is a nightmare for Turkish state. So we don't want our country to be divided, nor we don't want northern Iraq to be divided from Iraq mainland, because that may cause our country to be divided. Now, U.S. uses light torture on detainees. Okay, this is a version of light torture, just showing Bush's picture. And President Bush on global warming, as soon as he hears about it, he takes action. And we have this Saddam's video, everyone was sending to one another. It was a big thing at that time. So the guy says, I have Saddam's video. So I got Clinton's. Okay, these are the political stuff, but I do cartoons. Life is not full of politics. There are other issues. So I draw cartoons about other issues as well, man and woman issues. That's man. And that's woman. When I was preparing for this Davos meeting, sex on the brain thing, I learned that man can only focus on one thing, whereas woman can easily focus on many issues. So this is a cartoon about it. And this is for dog lovers. This is who runs who, we don't know, These are the kind of cartoons that I used to submit to newspapers when I was a PhD student, and they would use them in their op-ed pages, whenever they had a matching article. This is another one of these. This is business environment. And this is friendship. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do have time for more questions.
Okay.
So if you could wait for the microphone. And I encourage all of you to stick around because there's a reception following this with some very nice food. It's over here.
You mentioned that you spend a lot of time also working on children's books.
Yes.
Are your children's books in a similar vein? Is there a particular concept or concepts that you're trying to get across to children? Can you tell us more about that?
No, the concept is family life can be fun. It's fun. So there's this chicken family. There is this chick, a little girl, and has a father and a mother. So their everything life is put together in a funny environment. So that's the whole concept. It has no politics. There is nothing about the daily things of happening in the country. So it has no regional emphasis, so the books could be read and enjoyed any place in the world. It's a quite success. And when I started this 15 years ago, I got this idea in America, I said, American cartoonists do comic strips and Americans read it and enjoy it. As an editor, you can fire a columnist. Nobody would object. But if you take a comic strip off your page, then you would get lots of reactions. So comic strips keeps your readers intact. So with that in mind, I started my own comic strip in Turkey, which we didn't have the same kind of comic strip at that time. So, and I realized that it works. It worked, but I had to work hard. I had a do and don'ts. To-do list, do's and don'ts. For instance, there is no sex, there is no vulgar, correct Turkish. No politics, and those are the don'ts, and do's are lively colors, and you have to draw it no matter what every day. So I keep doing this, and it became part of my life. Now wherever I go, I submit a cartoon a day for the strip. And then several years after I started, I went to a publisher and asked him to publish a book of it. And they said, cartoon books don't sell. So I and my wife started a publishing business just to publish my books, because I knew that it would sell. So far, we sold about 1.5 million books in about 12 years. And because children grow up and young ones come. So my audience is always there, and my first book is still in print, I keep printing. And several years ago, 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, I met Charles Schulz. He died afterwards. So he saw it and he said, that's a good idea. So, you should be able to market this here for American audience. And I didn't know, he said, I didn't know that American and Turkish family life was this close. It is very close. So he suggested he called his syndication and get an appointment for us. So I went to their office in the New York City with the help of Charles, with reference from Charles Schulz. So we had discussions, several meetings, and he said that, this would make a, good cartoon strip in America, but we don't need it. The reason we don't need it, because we already sold our family strips to newspapers. Now, if we sell this to an American company, to a newspaper, then they will have to take one of ours, old ones, and put this one. So it's not a good business deal. Now, they are more interested about new things in the American population. Single mothers, gays, urban Hispanic kids, and so on. Cartoon strips about those population groups. I said, I know nothing about that. So that's why I don't have a comic strip in America. But I said it's a growing business in Turkey. It's the most popular, comic strip in the country. That's totally different line of business. And my wife runs the publication and licensing and merchandising business from New York.
Earlier you have said that you moved to New York City like 10 years ago. My question would be, do you get a more clear picture of the daily events from outside than you have been when you were living inside? Do you actually miss something when you're in the, just at the center of the events? Is it easier to get a picture when you're, living abroad?
Yeah, it's easier. When you live in Turkey, it's easier. You feel it. But since you are in it, it may not be the correct feeling, the feeling that you would like to get. When you look at it from outside, it's more interesting. And it's more difficult to get a grasp of things because you have to read every single article, every single newspaper. It takes more time. But also you get to read New York Times, you get to watch American television, and all these things put the things in a different perspective. And also, I keep going and coming back. Whenever I go there, I see different things. Recently, I went to Istanbul and sitting in a restaurant, having dinner in a restaurant. A lady at the next table just lit her cigarette. I said, "What's she doing?" I mean, but that's normal in Istanbul. But you get shocked. So it's good for a cartoonist to get shocked, or good for a cartoonist not to get used to things happening. Sometimes so many absurd, funny things happening, but you don't see it because you are in it, you are living it. It doesn't look funny to you. But when you come or look at it from outside, it looks different to you. So it has more advantages than disadvantages.
I just have one more brief question. I'm sorry to have so many questions, but in your process, would you say that you're more an artist with your hand or more from your brain, your thought process?
I think brain, because it takes me about 10 minutes to draw. I mean, it's not a big thing, and I'm not very proud of my drawings. I think anybody can do it, but people say no. But my daughter recently wrote and illustrated a book. She was 16. Now she's 18, but she said she's going to write a book about America for Turkish audience. And she said, and I'm going to also illustrate it. You cannot draw. She said, why not? And she sat down and she drew in a different style, simpler, but she did draw. So people can draw if they have intention. I mean, not necessarily the most beautiful, most detailed drawings, but everyone can express themselves, especially at younger ages, with drawings, by drawing. So I don't really worry about how I draw. It's the idea is I have to express my opinion through drawings. And it usually takes about 10 minutes, but it's the thinking process. It's coming out with an idea, which is the most stressful, because if you don't come out with a strong idea, the next day you will be embarrassed to millions of, at least 2 million people will be reading you. And that's an embarrassing situation. You feel like that day should be over as soon as possible and start the next day immediately. Good thing about living in America, you don't get to see these readers much often, but
question about how cartooning and the whole art of illustration has changed over the last 30 years. As I remember when I was there in the 1970s, I became addicted to Turkish cartoon magazines. There were lots of them. And I remember there was a lot of sex and a lot of politics. And then they seemed to change. Those cartoon magazines closed, new ones opened, and there were different styles, there was Turhan Selçuk style, and there was, there's this Limon, and so could you, and there were also people winning international prizes, Turkish cartoonists. So I was curious about, one, why cartooning is such an important and well-developed area in Turkey. And secondly, what has happened to it over time? What do you think of it now as a general thing? And what types of cartoons are there?
Okay. We call, there are a group of cartoonists, older cartoonists. We call them generation of 50s. They started working as cartoonists in 1950s. So these people used to draw in the similar style than Eastern European countries, artists of Eastern Europeans. They are much more subtle, more intellectual, very simple, sometimes not funny, but you can get a message, and the message usually depends on how you look at it. It's more like a puzzle than a funny popular cartoon. So those were the cartoons until 1970s or mid 70s. And if you had understood those cartoons or appreciated them, then you felt good because you felt intellectual. And then with Oğuz Aral, who was a quite popular cartoonist, he came out with this magazine called Gırgır. In that magazine, he had a different definition of cartoons. He started putting cartoons of young cartoonists in a style that, I mean, they draw whatever they lived. I mean, if they were students, they drove about their classrooms, their teachers, and then everybody started drawing cartoons and everybody started appreciating cartoons. They understood jokes, they loved jokes, so it became so popular that it was the best-selling cartoon magazine in the world, or second best-selling. But the problem with it, since it was drawn by young kids and mostly students, they were not really politics, or the politics in it are very simple idea usually. Whatever they are taught at school, they promoted that, so they all thought they were all leftists because they are that's being modern and whatever. So that was the thing. But they never made the front pages of new political newspapers as editorial cartoonists because they were found simplistic, or the cartoonists found not worthy enough to be tell or present an opinion, political opinion, on the front page of a newspaper. I wasn't part of that cartoon scene because I wasn't in Turkey at that time. I was in Philadelphia working on my architectural studies, meanwhile sending cartoons of similar kind to American newspapers. Then when I went back home, I came out with a different political cartoon style influenced by Americans. Okay, it has to be funny to begin with, and it has to be understood. I mean, people would understand and appreciate it, and it should not have an ideological baggage, meaning that, I mean, if you are a leftist and if you draw a cartoon that a leftist people would like, so you have an audience, whether it's funny or not. If you are a rightist, then you draw a cartoon on that line and you have an audience, ready audience. So instead, I started drawing cartoons issue-oriented. Okay, there is this issue, so what do I think about that? So I draw about it. Whether it's leftist or rightist, I didn't care much. And also, I used words, writings, speech balloons, and explanation on the top, so people would understand what's going on, what's it referred to, so on. And I also thought that it should be daily thing, because people would read one thing and next day, so they would get used to the style and so on. And I also even furthermore put it into a comic strip context. Okay, my Bizim City, that's the name of my political cartoons. Actually, Bizim City is a cowboy city in Wild West, which is very similar to Turkey. The sheriff of the town is actually our Turkish prime minister, mayor is the president, and so on. So things happened, the things happening in Turkey, I criticize them in this cowboy city environment context. So it became popular, people liked it. And I had a TV version of it, animations every day. I show animations 5 days a week after the news bulletin. So it became popular, and I get reactions from taxi drivers to professors and so on. And now other newspapers started to have cartoonists who draw similar to this one, and I used color, especially with the help of computer technology, Photoshop and so on. So that's the cartoon style now. You see many papers now have cartoonists on the front page or some other page, but they have cartoons. Problems with the cartoonists. There was a criticism about cartoonists in Turkey. One guy said, who was a cartoon historian, cartoonists are not as smart as, or they are not as intellectuals as columnists. And cartoonists get very upset about this. But he had a point, because You see, in order to choose a columnist, you have a whole bunch of people who can write. That's a lot of people and who have opinion. But in order to choose for a cartoonist position, you have only very limited number of people who could draw. So among them, some of whom are not as may not be as intellectual or, you know, as columnists. That's why they seem not as intellectual as columnists. But it's a good profession, actually, because once you could draw or express yourself through cartoons, you are, I mean, one of a kind in a way, because not there are many people doing that. So your job security is quite good.
No? Well, then let us give Salih Memecan a big hand.
Thank you.